Now, many people do not even approach the book of Revelation because of the way it is structured and what it contains. And so, both the substance and the form of the book of Revelation serve as turnoffs for many people. Another reason why the book of Revelation is a turnoff for many people is the book of Revelation is a sort of psycho-spiritual operation. It is a demonic piece of work, and there appears to be a number of things that are positive in the book of Revelation, but generally speaking, the flow of the book of Revelation, the tone of the book of Revelation, it is essentially demonic. We're going to be looking specifically at these horses again, but we are going to jump over some of the content, and we're going to jump right into Revelation 6:8. Now, we have already started talking about this pale horse, but we are going to go into a little bit of detail about the nature of this horse and the rider. Now, we're not going to start off with a deep deconstruction of Revelation 6:8, but we are going to look at some of the basic dynamics, and the dynamics in Revelation 6:8 are significant. So now read along with me as we cover these two sentences. These sentences are significant. One sentence is just as important as the other sentence. And then we're going to do a basic deconstruction of this. And then subsequent to this, we will go into a bit more analyses related to this particular book, chapter, and verse. And so at 8, it indicates, "And I looked, and behold, a pale horse. And his name that sat on him was Death, and hell followed with him." If you notice, death and hell are underlined, so we are going to focus on that. It continues on with the next sentence. "And power was given unto them over the fourth part of the earth, to kill with sword, and with hunger, and with death, and with the beasts of the earth." If you'll notice, power is underlined, given unto them is underlined, over the fourth part of the earth is underlined. So we're going to do sort of a who, what, where type of exercise here with respect to this particular passage. And so again, the important part starting out is, who is the entity that is acting in this vision. And so with respect to this vision that John is having, the horse is pale, and there's a little bit more that goes along with this pale horse also. We're not going to go too deeply into that, but a pale horse can also be understood as a sickly horse. And so a horse that has turned green because of sickness. But what we also have is this rider. And so the rider is the entity that is doing the action, okay, carrying out this action. And so the rider is twofold. The rider is death and hell following. Okay, so those are two entities, but they are highly related. So we have the who. And then what? Death and hell have been given power or authority or supremacy, dominance, sovereignty over what? Now, this is a very important part of this apocalypse, these four horses of the apocalypse. Because in this particular instance, a particular portion of the world appears to be singled out. And that portion of the world that has been singled out, in terms of historical narratives, the fourth part of the earth is also known as America. Now, it's possible that we don't have the entire history and that the fourth part is something else, but with respect to the history that is readily available, we have America being the fourth part. Now, when deconstructing all of this, it was important to identify whether this was saying a fourth part of the earth or the fourth part of the earth. And the word that is used is the fourth part of the earth, which would suggest either the biosphere or America. And based upon the way that it's presented, it appears that it is America. And so what is the purpose of death and hell, this rider? The purpose of death and hell that have been given this authority, power, supremacy over America, the goal is to destroy. It indicates there to kill. How will death and hell, according to this vision, carry out this power, authority, supremacy, dominance, sovereignty over this fourth part? How will it destroy? It indicates here by way of sword, which would be a weapon, hunger, which would include famine, or some other form of starvation, death, which is a reiteration of the rider, by the way, and then beast, Beasts. This is the same construct that goes along with another beast, and so it is Therion. Now, oddly, the way this Revelation 6:8 is structured and this indicator of America being the fourth part brings up a couple of questions. First of all, this narrative, this vision, seems to comport with the doctrine of discovery and the doctrine of conquest. And this is also tied to these other apocalyptic horses that we read about in this vision. And so it's a very interesting vision that this entity is having about something called the fourth part that the entities at the time were not aware of existing. Okay, so as far as they knew, according to the narrative, there were these three parts: Europe, Africa, and Asia. And then the fourth part was sought out in one way or another and discovered, if you will, and then colonized. Okay, so we have this fourth part. There's a question about the who is doing all of this. The other names for death and hell are Thanatos in the Greek. That was the original word that was used. And then in the Latin, Thanatos has a name. Thanatos is a deity in mythology. And there is a counterpart in the Latin. And that entity is Mors. Then there is Hades. Hades has a very interesting etymology dynamic going on here. The other word for Hades, which is hell, is apparently Adonai. And of course, as we've touched on before, the root of Adonai is Adon. And here you can see in this Greek mythology source the Greek name Thanatos, a transliteration there. The Roman name is Mors, and the translation for all of that is death or Thanatos. Now there is also a Hebrew construct that goes along with this, and there is an Egyptian entity that goes along with this. And here you can see the transliteration more clearly. Now, at first glance, it's not completely clear that this Hades is tied to Adonai. And so upon closer inspection, you can start to see the relationship. And if you see in terms of these alternative forms for the ancient Greek, you see one appears to be ADs, and that's without the H sound. And so that's what's happening with this etymology, is that H for Hades apparently is silent. Okay. And so what we have here is the first alternative form is AIDES, AIDS, and then an AIDS, and then something interesting emerges. And so there's something else added on to it. And it is AIDONEUS. And here we can see the alternate name spellings for this Hades, ADs, and it indicates also that this translation for this word means the unseen one. And so that, of course, would coincide with this idea of an apocalypse where there is the uncovering, and this book of Revelation, which is essentially the same thing. And so if you look down at the alternate name spellings, you see that Greek word there with the AIDONEUS again. And this is a Latin spelling for Hades. So now let's go back and revisit this Seth as the unseen one. Now there are other entities in terms of the Egyptian pantheon that share this particular dynamic in terms of a description, but we're going to focus on Seth for this because that is the overarching construct. what we find is Set is understood as or defined as the hidden one. What this means is that Seth is embodied in a number of entities. And so his identity is inside of a number of other identities. And so these other identities are serving as sort of a cover for Set. And one entity, as we know, is the entity known as Seth. But there are others. We're going to quickly look at some of them, and then we're going to look at this understanding in terms of etymology of Set or Seth as the hidden one. And we've looked at this before with respect to the Egyptian entity that is tied into this Thanatos construct, this Moors construct. And what we see is Sithri. And this is just another derivative of Set or Seth. And what we will see here is a reminder that that construct of Set is the construct of the hidden one. And so we have Adonai as the hidden one, Hades as the hidden one, and Scepter, Set, to hide or conceal. Again, Set is understood as the hidden one. And so with respect to Set being correlated with Thanatos, correlated with Hades, and correlated with this revelation, it is suggested that Set is what is being revealed in the book of Revelation. And of course, this might explain why the entities in the book of Revelation don't hang together with the rest of the New Testament. These entities that are being revealed are inconsistent with the entities that are addressed in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And so this is something new that's going on in the book of Revelation, but it's not completely new because it harkens back to the Old Testament. And so you see here that there is this idea of hidden, concealed, or crypto. This name is also a part of the Levitical genealogies. And so this Seth construct, this Seth entity, this entity to be revealed is a part of the priesthood. And so logically, what we have here is Set in some sort of way has been given authority, power, dominion over the fourth part specifically. And here we see another notation related to this Sith, Seth, Sithri belonging to the Levites. And this was a collective, as you should recall, that was set apart or consecrated for religious duties and performing duties in the tabernacle, later the temple. And here you see that Sather, Sathar, Sathar. Definition, a Levite. Now let's address Hades specifically. Interestingly, at Revelation 6:8, you have this Strong's entry at 86. This is in the Greek, and it indicates that Hades is the realm of the dead. This is a masculine noun, but what's also interesting is the actual pronunciation versus what we have been told over time. And so it's pronounced HADES, indicating the grave or hell. What's also noteworthy is the word origin for this HADES. Apparently, the word origin is the word alpha. A for alpha, and this is at Strong's 1. Okay, so in the Greek, Strong's 1, you have alpha. And what's also interesting is that this origin is at 1492. And with respect to this, it is referring to this idea of being able to see. No doubt that's associated with being illuminated. So essentially, HADES or Hades is associated with not only an unseen place, but also an entity that is understood as the unseen one. These colonizers certainly did bring a bunch of mess with them. And here you can see additional information about Hades or this Adonai or Adonis. You can see that it is related to this symbol known as the royal scepter and also cornucopia, the horn of plenty. There's also an indication here that another name for Hades is Pluton. And we've looked at that before. And we see the Roman name Pluto and Orcus. And here we see this entity understood in the book of Revelation as the power over the fourth part. We see this entity was depicted as a dark, bearded, regal deity. And the entity was either depicted as this Adonai, enthroned in the underworld, holding a bird-tipped scepter, or as Pluton, the giver of wealth, pouring fertility from a cornucopia. The Romans named this deity Dis, or Pluto. The Latin form of his title, Pluton, means the Lord of Riches. So in other words, this is the deity worshipped by those who apparently sought to be given wealth. And here we see another interesting notation about this name, meaning the ruler of many. And so, of course, the first thing that might jump out at you is that it looks like it's going to be pronounced in a way that's similar to Adonis, and indeed it is. And again, we see this relationship between Adonai and Adonis. And here you can see the potential interchange with Adonis and Adonai. And if you look over to the right, you see Adon. Now in this instance, Adonai is coming in detected as Lithuanian. And then when you look at the translation of Adonai into the Latin, you see Dominus. If you go down further, you see Adonis. And this became clear once looking at each Greek letter in isolation and then having it translate over into the English, and that Greek word that is HADES, okay, is translating into the English as Adonai. And here you can see the letter translations again, and you see them going over from the Greek into the English as Adonai. And here you see, in terms of the understanding of Adonai, it indicates that this is a Hebrew name for a deity. And what is noteworthy is that there is a big G that goes along with this. For clarification, we're going to revisit a discussion that we had previously related to Adonai or Adonai. If you see at Strong's 136, this is in the Hebrew, it indicates that Adonai is another way of saying Lord or Lords. It also indicates that this is used as a proper name for God with the big G. And this is in the Hebrew. Now, of course, we were talking about these constructs that are going across languages, not just time, but actually going across languages, Hebrew and the Greek. And so here you can see the usage of this Adonai in Genesis 15. While we're not going to look at this in this particular discussion, one of the things that you might want to make note of is that this Adon or Adon word is found in a number of very significant constructs. Magadan, Megiddo, Armageddon, Abaddon. There's a lot going on with this particular construct. And here you can see that this Adonai is a form of Adon. And another way of understanding this Adon is a lord, a master, an owner, a sovereign controller, whether human or divine. And here we see Adon at 113 in the Hebrew, meaning Lord, Master, Controller. An entity that is structured to rule. That's a part of the word origin, is this idea of ruler. And here you can see the letter translations again, and you see them going over from the Greek into the English as Adonai. And here you can see the transliterations and forms. Again, this is not a very direct root that you see here with respect to HADES. And so again, it's not readily apparent, at first blush, it's not readily apparent that these are the same constructs or that these are the same words or that there is an etymology relationship, but it is clear that that exists. And consistent with this destruction that is being envisioned in the book of Revelation in 6:8 in particular, you see this dynamic of Abaddon. And if you recall, Abaddon is another word for a destroying angel. The other name is Apollyon. And here you can see the transliteration more clearly. And so to put this in context with respect to the passage, Revelation 6:8, the entity or one of the entities that according to this vision is given authority over or power over or will be given power or authority over America. It goes on to indicate that Abaddon is the angel of the abyss. And so again, that ties to this idea of Hades. And so you see the same construct over and over. Now, people, of course, are free to believe whatever it is they choose to believe with respect to spirituality and even with respect to the book of Revelation. But there are a couple of things that I want to point out about this book of Revelation and what took place during the colonial era. The colonial era involved all of these dynamics related to the themes that you see with those four horses of the apocalypse. And so with respect to those four horses in Revelation 6, you see this repeated theme of conquering, destruction, disease, violence, slavery, theft, essentially. And so there is this history that goes along with this. And this appears to have been a part of a crusade, if you will. Now, many people are seeking justice related to what they lost and what took place during this particular period in history specifically. Now, while justice is due, one should not expect justice from the entities or the descendants of the entities that perpetuated these wrongs. These types of wrongs that are described in terms of history are very psychopathic. And so with respect to the psychopathic mind, we are talking about a mind that is bent on both deception and destruction. And there, of course, is some narcissism that's also going on there. But there is no remorse. So therefore, there is no willing apology that would be forthcoming. There is no interest in repairing any damage or righting any wrongs, because what has taken place has been intentional. When an entity is psychopathic and they are doing what they do, they intend to hurt. They intend to damage. They intend to destroy. They intend to steal. They intend to deceive. They intend to do all of that. And so therefore, approaching them about remorse or empathy or restitution, all of those sorts of things, that falls on deaf ears, because they did what they did and they are benefiting from whatever it is that they did. They meant to do it. And so there's no room for sorry because there is no remorse, quite frankly. And so the damage that has been done has been intentional. And one of the other things that entities who have that psychopathic mind believe is that when people are deceived, they deserve to be deceived. So that's what they believe. And so it's sort of that joy that they have in the deception itself. And so if they pull the wool over someone's eyes or they get them to agree to some sort of contract or treaty, that is not going to be beneficial for the other party. They are not going to feel bad about this unconscionable thing. They are actually going to feel good. And the more that you talk to them or you approach them about the pain and the suffering that they have caused, the more glee they feel in what they have done. And so they are not going to have remorse. And so all of these things that these four horses of the apocalypse, all of these things that these horses are up to, these are not things for which an apology would be given. These are things that are apparently a part of a worship and a religious process. And so if you look at it, these horses come out based upon these seals being opened by an entity that has several horns and several eyes. Okay. And people are, instructed to believe that this entity is supposed to be the entity known as Jesus. But according to the Jesus narratives, there were no 7 horns and 7 eyes going on with the entity known as Jesus in the Gospels, what you call the Gospels. And so this entity that pops up in the book of Revelation and related entities, these entities basically are demonic. So they are Seth or Set-like. Now, when we look again at what Set or Seth is all about, we see that there are manifestations of the Set worship all throughout the Americas. Even the word state is another way of saying Set. And so we see a lot of worship of Set in all of these dynamics that have taken place. And you see these manifestations of this again in the book of Revelation. And so while the fourth part might not have initially been so war focused, we see that what has been brought to the fourth part is a worship of Set or Seth. And so you see even now this bringing back up this war focus. And that's basically in the name of Set or Seth, because Set is the deity of war. This is the deity of chaos and storms and strength and violence and confusion. And so when we say that we have a department of this or a ministry of this, what we are saying is that we have a ministry of Set. And you can see the emblems that are there along with the Phrygian cap. And so that is also speaking something. With respect to the treaties that were entered into with respect to the American Indians, that was also a part of this war department or this war ministry. And of course that name was changed, but now we are apparently going back to a decided and concentrated focus on chaos, violence, and confusion. All of this in the name of Set, because another way of saying Set is war. And if you look at various other countries, you see that for the most part, they use the term defense now. And so they have defense ministries, departments of defense. And so it's a little odd when an entity that is in the book of Revelation at Revelation 6:8 decides that it should have a ministry of war. In other words, a ministry of Set. And so that's the focus, a ministry of conflict, chaos, confusion, aggression. And one of the things that's mentioned about the horses, one of the horse riders, is tasked with taking peace from the earth. And so if you're taking peace from the earth, you are bringing conflict, battle, hostility, aggression. And so war is the anti-peace. It's the antithesis of peace. And so when that is asserted, then that's what we are talking about. And so this is essentially taking peace from the earth. And so when there is a focus on studying war, engaging in war, that is taking peace from the earth. That is Revelation 6. And of course, you have all of these very interesting people that are very determined to summon whatever it is they think their Messiah happens to be. And remember, Messiah is not the same as the word Jesus or Yeshua or Yehoshua or Joshua. That's not the same construct. And so all we're talking about with Messiah is someone who is anointed, essentially. And so we don't know what Messiah these people are waiting for or trying to summon. Apparently, Set is a part of it. And so with respect to this Revelation 6, we see this theme over and over again related to ruin, destruction, subjugation, and the spoils of war, essentially theft. And so that's what's being worshipped. So that's a part of that Pluto worship also. There is a worship of riches. There is a worship of spoils. There is a worship of power. There is a worship of destruction. There is a worship of ruin. There is a worship of all of this pathology, a worship of subjugation. And so therefore you see all of this going around the world enslaving people, because there is a worship of this type of dynamic. And so there is the worship of conflict. There is the worship of consternation. There is the worship of war. And some people are so narcissistic, they don't care what type of attention they receive as long as they receive attention, good, bad, or otherwise. And so they have no problem with being identified in this purported vision in the book of Revelation. They have no problem with that because, that gives them some sort of notoriety. And so they are down with the get down with this. And so many people are proud to associate themselves with something that would be identified in the book of Revelation. It's an odd way to get attention, but this is what works for many people. And so with respect to all of these pathologies that are manifested, that are advanced, many people are comfortable with it because, again, it makes them look elevated, like they are special ones. They are the powerful ones. And many people are on board with that. Even if they aren't the powerful ones, they like being associated with the entities that are going out doing battle, that are going out picking on people, that are going out taking things by force. They don't mind being associated with this because they are of like mind. Don't get it confused here. You have higher level and higher functioning psychopathic individuals, but then you also have people who might not be that high functioning, but they are still psychopathic. And so therefore they are on board with all of this. They want all of the smoke. And so for many people, Set is their salvation. This is the entity, this is the energy, this is the dynamic that they are looking for, they are living for. They are all in with this. They will find all sorts of ways to defend any narrative related to Seth. Seth is not that bad. Seth is great. Many people are worshiping Seth. Many people are identifying themselves as being descendants of Seth. So you have the entire Abrahamic umbrella under Seth, a large collective of people globally identifying themselves as associated with Seth and this Seth priesthood. It often goes by different names, but it is what it is. And so by extension, people are also identifying with these dynamics that are in the book of Revelation. They are decidedly identifying with this Revelation 6 and these various horses. Now let's go back to this Abaddon entity. This entity is not only the deity of destruction, this deity of hell. This entity is also instrumental in creating chaos and confusion and discord and war and ruin on the earth itself. So let's get back to Abaddon. Now this word is also tied to that word, that place name of Magadan. And you see this related to a particular ancient group in Western Asia. And so it indicates here that this Abaddon, again, it's another name for perish, ruin, destruction, destroyer, the place of destruction. And this is in the Old Testament. And here you can see the translation of the word that is used to indicate something specific about fourth part. In this case, it is the fourth part. And you also see this reiteration of this in some versions with the Omicron by itself still indicating the. Now, of course, we've discussed this before also, that the word is also a part of a God code. You see the in words like theology, okay? And speaking of theology, as we wrap this up, one thing that is noteworthy about this entire dynamic is that there is essentially a religious precept that involves waiting for, anticipating, praying for the destruction of the fourth part and the people in the fourth part. This has become a religious paradigm coming out of the book of Revelation. And so it is something that, with respect to the unveiling of these horses of the apocalypse, it is something that people consciously or unconsciously are essentially begging for. And clearly, it is not enough for individuals to simply listen to preachers and pastors and priests and these new gurus who are out here now, these prophets and prophetesses. It's not enough to listen to these entities. It is very important that you have a clear understanding of what it is you say you believe and the foundation of this belief. And so if the foundation or part of the foundation of your belief is this particular book that culminates in this book of Revelation, wherever the book of Revelation came from, it's incumbent upon you to be the one to do the studying. It's not enough to just receive what is given from someone else, something that's regurgitated, generally speaking. It's not enough to do that, because you can see here that there are all sorts of dynamics going on in that book of Revelation alone that call for deep exegesis and caution. And so this is another reminder that it's important to understand the deities that people are talking about. And so when entities are praying to particular deities, It's important to understand the nature of the deity to which they are praying. And so don't be so quick to just accept something with the God tag to it. It's important to find out the name of this God that is being referenced, the name of this Christ that is being referenced. And of course, we've done a discussion on the construct of Christ. And so you need to know exactly what people are talking about. You need to ask them for clarity and ask them, what does a word mean to them? What do they understand it to mean? What is it that they are invoking and calling forth? And I guess a final question really revolves around, out of all of the earth, why the fourth part? Why does this Eastern religious paradigm involve the destruction very specifically of a land space and an ancient collective of people that, according to these historic narratives, had nothing to do with the people in the East who were writing these particular passages? The entity who was on the Greek island of Patmos had nothing to do with what we now understand as the fourth part. And so what is this really all about? Now, this notation in the book of Revelation is significant for a number of reasons. First of all, many people believe that this book is the end all be all in terms of the earth. Many people also believe in the book of Revelation as their salvation. Many people believe that the things that are envisioned in the book of Revelation are just desserts for things that people have done. Now, with respect to the fourth part, we are not simply talking about destroying the fourth part physically in terms of geography, but there is the indication that the people of the fourth part either have been destroyed or will be destroyed in the future. This is very interesting because this does not seem to be a part of any sermons that people are giving related to these four horses of the apocalypse. It would be very interesting to hear the diverse analyses of this particular passage in Scripture. There are also some other interesting notations with respect to the other horses. We've discussed one in particular. But this particular horse is carrying a very specific and unique entity, or these entities, with noteworthy purposes and noteworthy plans and methods for accomplishing the purposes. There's a question, of course, about how did the fourth part get included in this vision, and the entities that came forth with that doctrine of discovery and doctrine of conquest. How was it that they didn't have any thought about a fourth part when the entities that were dispatched were being dispatched from what is known as the church? And so there's a question about whether this Revelation 6:8 is serving as a vision or serving as a roadmap related to a prior colonization or a future destruction of the same place, the Americas, and everything that goes along with that. There are a number of questions going on here with respect to this passage. That's for sure. Remember, knowledge is power.